Hey everyone, I'm Mary Frances Porter, and I am CEO and founder of Partnerships for Strategic Impact. And I am having this conversation with you today to talk about program evaluation, why it's not your job, and what you can do instead. I have three goals for this talk. One is to relieve you of the obligation to prove your impact. The second is to introduce you to my ImpactStory strategy as a way of straightforwardly, sustainably, and affordably tracking and telling your impact story. And the third is to give you some tools and resources that you can use right now. I want to tell you just a little bit about me. I've been working with small and medium-sized nonprofits and their funders and learning alongside of them for more than the last 20 years. And during that time, I've noticed a lot of funders and nonprofits really struggling with the pressure of having to prove impact. So I want you just to think for a minute about, when was the last time you needed to prove your impact? Maybe it was something really substantial and time consuming, like responding to an RFP, answering a grant. Or maybe it was something shorter and more spur of the moment, like speaking in front of city council. What I noticed is that this actually happens quite a bit. Nonprofits are asked all the time to talk about their impact. And what I see is a lot of folks kind of scrambling to figure out what story they want to tell and what data they're going to use, and kind of starting from scratch every time. So the challenges that I've identified in this process are five. And the first one is this pressure that I think everyone feels to do program evaluation. I think this started back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. Program evaluation was really in its heyday. It was exploding, as was studying human processes and social processes over time. And this was a time when people were really interested in what helps people thrive, whether social programs were working, how do we know, how do we tell? And so during that last part of last century, there was a lot of research and work and questions sort of just floating around all over. Then in the year 2002, things happened. The first one is that the last 40 years of research that had been going, longitudinal overtime research, was starting to become available. And the second thing that happened is that the internet was starting to become something. And so this is when things like the What Works Clearinghouse started, where people, you, me, anyone, could go online and they could start reading and learning about what were called evidence-based programs that scientists had studied over time and that had been shown to work to help people do better socially, to help improve the communities, to help improve people's lives. Then in 2009, when Obama was elected, he really focused on policies that had scientific evidence. And I think all these things are great. They're really important, and we use a lot of this information every day. But it's also put a lot of words in our minds about what science is and what we should be doing to understand social challenges and their successes. So I wonder how many of you guys, raise your hand if you've been asked to use a comparison group, a statistically significant sample, what are your long-term outcomes? I think these are things that people are actually asked for quite a bit. But all these kinds of words, these are actually scientific words. These are things that the scientists use in order to be able to demonstrate that programs work. There has started to be a shift, though. In 2010, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation started to articulate something they called actionable measurement. Now, this phrase might have been around before then, but it's the first time that I had encountered that. And this isn't so much necessarily about proving whether or not programs work, which is also something that's actionable, but it's about the whole array of different ways in which data and measurement might help people be actionable. So while there are times that nonprofits or funders might want to partner with scientists to develop and test the efficacy of a program, like does this program work or not work? And there also might be times when either of those kinds of organizations may want to bring in an outside evaluator to be able to help them kind of understand what's going on, either stuff in the community or stuff in the organization or stuff with their clients. But a lot of time, what I have found the basic day in, day out of nonprofits are steady data collection that helps them know what clients are getting from them. What are clients actually receiving? What is that goodness? And then how do organizations use that in order to figure out how to do what they're doing better? A bunch of large funders actually got together in 2016. You can go to listenforgood.com and see how they have even started to ask for client feedback as a tool for program improvement. What do we need to do to better serve people? And as an avenue for equity in order to be able to give the people who are being served voice and power in the direction of the programming. So what all this leads to is that from 99% of you guys, program evaluation is not your job. You're a practitioner. I want you to think about yourself like a doctor. So if you go to your general practitioner because you have an infection, they diagnose it, they give you some sort of intervention or medicine that they are pretty sure is going to work. They send you home with instructions, you do it, and they check on you later and they say, did you get better? But they're not the ones actually doing the science in order to make sure people get better. So they're not sending you home with an antibiotic and somebody else home without an antibiotic to see which one it is that works. That's something that's done in a different space. That's something that's often done by scientists. But the practitioners, the people who are using science in order to actually help people in the real world, in daily life, that's what nonprofits are. They're practitioners. The second challenge I noticed is very much associated with this feeling of having to do program evaluation, is having to do fancy data analysis. And there was a study not very long ago that showed that less than half of social science leaders really are able to capture information about their clients and use it. And what it also showed is that the 75% of the people that weren't doing that were doing it because there were limited time and resources, or it felt too complicated. But in reality, shouldn't tracking your impact be no harder than tracking your budget? Isn't that how it is for-profit businesses? Granted, what they're measuring is profit, and goodness is harder to manage. But shouldn't there be some more equivalency there? So I'm wondering if tracking impact feels too complicated or expensive. Just raise your hand. It can feel like a big deal. Challenge 3 is actually using the data. So there was a study done very recently that showed that 72% of nonprofits do have some data, but they still need support in how to make that actionable. So even the organizations that do have data, most of them are like, well, now what do I do with it? And that same survey showed that the smallest nonprofits are actually having the hardest time meeting their fundraising goals. And I'm going to guess that not a small part of that is actually being able to use that data. A survey here in my state by my favorite Center for Nonprofit Excellence found out that only about 13% of nonprofits feel that evaluation is a strength. And their recommendation was that nonprofits and funders actually work together to use evaluation for continuous learning and growth, which is exactly actionable impact. So again, raise a hand. Are you comfortable and confident in using the data that you do have? Fourth challenge, using other people's story frameworks. Most of you listening probably know what logic models are. These were designed in the 1950s by behavioral scientists and then really started to be used in like the 1980s by the United Way. And the United Way was using it as a funder would use it to help them understand how what they were giving you, the inputs, were going to result in outcomes, changes in people's lives and in the community and in society. The most popular logic model book right now is from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, hyperlinked right there. But my issue with this is that it's focused on inputs, what you're putting into the organization, the funding and the people, as opposed to the mission. So how does this actually fit with mission-driven organizations and assessing what your mission is? Another framework came about in the mid-1990s by evaluation scientists. Remember, valuation was like booming in the last part of the 1900s. And this describes why what you do is expected to have an impact. So if you want to get to community level change, what are the steps and what do you need to do in order to get there? There's actually a whole website on the Center on their theory of change. But one of the things that kind of I struggle with is that the actual data points are a little fuzzier here, and it's still not actually focused on mission. And how does it overlap with logic models? So I found myself and the nonprofits that I were working with kind of struggling a little with both these concepts. And I'm wondering how many of you have found theory of change or logic models to be tricky to create or use? The fifth challenge, and I would say arguably the most important challenge, is not really owning your story. What I've found, my experience is that when nonprofits are asked to tell a story, they go and they look in all the different files for all the different data that they're collecting for all their different funders, and they put it together into something pretty. And I think of this as shell art. And shell art is not necessarily unpleasant. It can be very nice and beautiful and effective and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't tell a story. It doesn't tell a story beyond like, I went to the beach and I put this together and isn't this pretty? What if you were able to, before you actually went and asked for money, have a mosaic in your mind about what data it is you need to collect and put it together to tell a story? That way, when a funder comes to you and they say, hey, we're interested in blue, you can be like, we've got all the blue data. We have you covered. That's something that we focus on. Our programming is focused on blue. And if a funder is saying, hey, we're offering money for people doing yellow, you can say, yeah, we do a good bit of yellow too. Come on over and let's work together. Let's partner. But if a funder comes to you and they say, we're offering green, and there is a little bit of green, you're doing a little bit of green, and you're like, should I apply for that money? We have a little bit of green. If you're really clear that your data mosaic, your study, your whole story really only has a touch of green, that keeps you from doing mission drift. You can go ahead and expand green. Maybe now's the time, but maybe it's not. And if you really have your story settled for yourself and you know what data is there telling it, you can be more effective in applying for these grants, and you can even be more sure about which grants to go after and which not. How many of you guys feel like your funders are driving your storytelling? So I think this is the pressure that I observed at the beginning. I think it's having to be a scientist to prove your value. I think it's that tracking outcomes and impact feels time consuming and complicated. I think a lot of folks are really unsure about how to use data. They're struggling with frameworks that don't really speak to nonprofits and what they actually need. And you're having to tell someone else's version of your story. So I started to think, over time, it kind of emerged. What if there was a straightforward and sustainable approach for tracking and talking about impact for nonprofits focused on exactly what it is that you all need? And I ended up creating the ImpactStory Strategy. And that's what I'm going to talk with you about now. We're going to go through the different parts and how it answers and addresses these 5 big challenges that nonprofits have. This is the strategy. There's 3 steps. The first one is mapping out your strategy so that you're clear about what you're doing. The second is gathering and understanding your data so that you're confident about what your impacts are. And the third step is telling that story using data visualization and marrying those narratives and that data together so that you're telling a really compelling story that moves people to action. Let's start with the solid framework, what that is. So instead of thinking about funders, focusing on what they're putting in, and instead of thinking about evaluators and why they think something's going to change, I started to think about like business plans, because a lot of your investors, they're actually business people, right? They are the people with the money are the business people. And the way that they think about business is, what do we value? Why do we think now is the good time to do this? What's the product? How are you going to produce it efficiently and effectively? How much money are you going to need for me? And what's my return on investment? And I think you can actually parallel this to nonprofits that are also corporations. It's just that what they're turning out, their product, is actually like goodness into the world. And so nonprofits have a vision. They have a local need, why what they're doing is important. They know how they're going to do this, so their focus and their approach and what impact they're trying to get. Then they have programs and activities that they do to get that impact. They need investment, resources, funding in order to be able to do that work well. And then that product, instead of being profit, is actually the goodness that they put into the world that people get from working with the nonprofit. So I turned this idea around and I focused it on mission. But before we talk about mission, I want you just to remember that there is some community level need that drove your founders of your organization to say, we need this organization. So it could be, juvenile delinquency or poor reading rates or, poverty or affordable housing or a lack of arts. There can be all sorts of things that are community needs. And somebody comes and says, wow, I could have a nonprofit that would support this. So that community level need is actually the impact that you're trying to make. You're actually trying to change and improve that community level need. And if you're able to make that impact and lots of other people are able to make similar impacts with their organizations, you get to a vision. And if you really think about it, a vision is what you value. You value a world where kids are not incarcerated, or you value a world where everybody has literacy, or affordable, safe places to sleep. So that is sort of what frames it, this idea that there's a need that you can contribute to and that's going to get the world to a better place. So then what you do is you focus on your product, which is your mission and the way you're going to implement your mission. And so you've got this little piece of the pie of the vision of this value that you're going to focus on. And then there's different ways that you're going to focus on this mission. I'm not going to go into this right now, what these solutions are, but they're actually key for making a really good strategic impact map that helps you really tie your programming to the impact. It helps you know what to adjust, and it also helps you identify funding streams. You actually could start to estimate how much each impact is costing. Then you need two things in order to be able to make that mission come to life. The first one is a really good set of programs and activities, and the second one is resources. And any resource costs money. So this is a capital investment, whether it's people or materials or office space or volunteers or your reputation or your values or your documents for your organization. All that stuff costs money. And so that's the investment that you're asking people to make. Then the return on investment is both the number of people that you reach, so the breadth of your service reach, and also how people are impacted by the work that you do, what they get. And that's the goodness that gets put out into the world. There's the goodness that a single person gets, and then how many people get that goodness. So here you have a whole story. It's, if you think about it, a logic model and a theory of change at the same time. Why what we do is important and how we're actually going to get there. This is what I call a strategic impact map, and this is what it looks like. I know it's too small right here to see, but there's a video that I have online on this link if you want to go and hear me talk about strategic impact maps. And then I've also created some templates that I've put out there for free for you guys. This is a nonprofit focused, a mission focused way of talking about how your mission leads to different solutions that you put into place, and that you need certain resources in order to ensure your productivity and your impact, which is the return on investment. And that, hopefully, what people take from you will actually help change the world. And that's why you get up in the morning. Using programming that works. This is also another important part of your strategy. When you are talking to people about why they should invest in you, there needs to be some reason to invest in you, right? So some need, some market analysis. that something about the community that isn't going the way it could. And this shows, one, that it's a real problem, that this is a gap that needs to be filled, and it can also create a sense of urgency for your organization. Then what you need are accessible citations that show that your programming should result in immediate impact for people. This is how your investors will know that your product, what you do, is a good bet, and that they're more likely to see goodness go out into the world because you're using strategies that we already kind of know work. And then lastly, I've also noticed that there's a lot of times where people have other kinds of information that they feel like they need to give to folks about why what they do is different or new or should work. And so you can talk about that too. How do you get all these kinds of citations? Well, you can Google them. I also have written a couple of, I call these impact statements, and I have them on my website. So you can go in and see a number of different ways that I've found resources to help organizations talk about this. But you're likely going to need some just for you. And so I also have a resource library online. And if you go to the Programming That Works tab, that'll take you to a whole list of different kinds of topics that you can click on. And a lot of them do have some really good science, very accessible, readable, not behind paywalls, summarized and written for public consumption, information about why programming should lead to immediate impact in these areas. So then what you have is, on one side of the paper, you have your strategic impact map, which shows how it is that you're going to achieve your mission. And on the other side of the paper, you have your citations that show why what you're doing is a good idea. So then you can use the citations to cite the different kinds of programming that you're using and the different impacts you're getting. Now, if you notice on these two slides, not everything is cited because not everything has science, but a lot of things are cited, and the most valuable things are cited. And you don't need more than one citation for anything, especially if it's a high quality citation. So you have your plan and why it's a good idea. Now you're clear about the impact that you're going for. It's specific, it's structured, and it's meaningful. So let's go on to data collection, smart surveys. The first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about what a survey is. A survey or questionnaires or polls are actually just ways to simplify the stories about impact your clients are telling you. So you're asking for opinions, demographics, experiences, needs. Polls are just yes, no. They just have a couple of questions. They're short surveys. And the important thing about surveys is that most of the time, 99% of the time, you really don't want to be asking pre-post surveys, because especially if you're just serving people over, like, I don't know, 6 months or something, they might not grow enough to move from scoring a 3 to scoring a 4 on your survey. But if you ask them, since working with us, how much have you gained in this? Then you will get people to say maybe not a lot and maybe a lot. And that gives you a much better sense of how much they've gotten from you. Tests, these are a different kind of thing, and people and nonprofits use these too, but they measure the amount or the degree of knowledge that somebody has. So just think math. They have to be given pre-post. What do you know now? And then let's teach you something and let's test how much it is you've learned. But for most of the things that nonprofits are out there doing with folks, there isn't a test. Needs assessment is something that is also a little bit different. It looks a lot like surveys, but it's really sometimes exploratory, like what needs do people have out there so we know what to serve. And other times it's diagnostic. Let's have you fill out all these questionnaires so we know exactly what it is we need to focus on. So if you have really good surveys, you're going to give your client's experience voice. It's going to give you information that you care about, which means that you can act on it. And it actually also helps you assess staff's performance. And so you can give staff more training. You can play to your staff's strengths, and you can improve programming. One very important thing to think about as you're writing your surveys, you're writing your survey questions, is that the questions you develop are only going to come from your perspective and your experience. And so write your questions, but then you're going to need to go out and you're going to need to check with other people in your organization, especially your frontline staff. Do these make sense? And then, you know, what's even better? Go to your clients and say, we're starting to create this new survey. Does this make sense to you? What would you say you got from working with us? There are essentially 4 things clients can get from you, and this list of things that you can put on a survey. Accomplishments. So nonprofit, I mean, people who are working with nonprofits, they can accomplish something. They can accomplish goals, they can get a credential, they can get a driver's license, they can write a business plan. Those are accomplishments, and those are usually things that you observe. The other things that they get from nonprofits are knowledge. They learn something new that they didn't learn, that they didn't know before. They get skills. They're now able to do something that they weren't able to do before, or they have new access or the ability to do something that they couldn't do before. So access is about reducing barriers or creating opportunities that people didn't have before they came to services. So that's really all that they can get. But in order for you to have some sense, and for other stakeholders in your organization to have some sense that people know enough and have gained enough in order to use it in their life and make things change, they need confidence. They need to feel good about what they've gotten and how to use it, and they need to be motivated to use it. So accomplishments, knowledge, skills, access, confidence, and motivation, that's what your surveys are going to ask about. They should also ask about the relevance of your programming to that person's life. Did it solve their problem? Did they feel connected to the programming and staff? Was it culturally relevant? And were they satisfied that they like what you had to offer? People who work with nonprofits often don't have choice. They're coming to a nonprofit because they need something, and you're the organization that can provide it. So it's especially important to make sure that you're giving them services that are relevant and high quality and that they like and value. I have a sample survey at this link that you can go in and get so that you can see one way of wording these very basic questions. Data analysis. Raise your hand if the words data analysis feel unpleasant. I know, honestly, it usually feels unpleasant to me, but I have some good news. You do not need to use any statistics, and you don't need to do statistics because you're not a scientist. It's not your job. You didn't go to school in statistics. You went to school in human services. You're not testing a hypothesis, which is what statistics is actually all about. Are we sure that this happened? You're dealing with individuals, not averages. You know what happens to that individual. You're also probably only have data on 100 people or less. And even if you have data on 500 people, it can be really hard to run any kind of statistics because once you break people into groups, there just aren't enough people. And most importantly, it's not your job. Remember, it's not your mission. It's not what you're doing. Your job is to help people. It's not to prove or do statistics or test a hypothesis, unless you want it to be, or unless you're Google and you have huge data and then you can actually run experiments on your data or run statistics on your data to answer scientific questions. But what you're doing is you are summarizing the client feedback so you can understand it, you can adapt, and you can tell those stories. I have here hyperlinked a blog that I wrote on all you need to know about statistics in less than 300 words. So click on it and read more. So what do you need to do for data analysis? You definitely need to know how to do percentages or proportions, same things, just one is over 100, right? And you need 3 Excel formulas, sum, count, and average, and you need 2 graphs. You need a bar graph so that you can compare groups, and you need a line graph so that you can look at things over time. That is literally it. Are there other bells and whistles and things you can do? Heck yeah. You can do tons of stuff in Excel, but this is the essentials for what it is that you need. Okay. So you have your data, you've got your bar graphs and your line graphs. How many of you have more than one person working to understand your data? This is actually super important. I'm going to talk to you about something that I call insight and learning team, and this is about turning your data into knowledge that you can use. So step 1, your data has to become graphs. If they're not graphs, you can't use it. unless you're looking at like just how many men and women, if you are using binary categories, there are, because then you don't really need a graph, but it still can be helpful actually. Then you need a process for taking those graphs and understanding them. And then you need a process of taking that understanding and say, this is what we know. These are our conclusions. Then that knowledge informs action. So then you say, because we know this, this is what we're going to do differently. So you go from data to understanding to knowledge to action. Here is a sample of the way that I would put graphs into a document for an insight and learning team to explore. I graph them very simply, and I write out just a little statement about what the graph says. That really helps people be able to ground themselves in the graph without having to think too hard about what the graph means. These are not the graphs you're going to put out into the out-facing world. These are for your team to be able to kind of pore over and think about, just like your finance team pores over your budget and thinks about your budget. Once they get these graphs, they're going to write whether the result is expected and whether that seems like good news or bad news, whether it's surprising, or whether they need more information. And then next to the graph, they can write out what the graph means to them. So not like there are more women than men, but wow, it looks like most of our shoppers are women. That way, people come in really having digested the graphs and being able to talk about what they think is in the graphs. But then they come into this meeting. I usually imagine insight meetings happening between 1 and 4 times a year, however often you get impact data. And they sit down and they ask questions about the data and they start to brainstorm what led to the results. That's the understanding. What do we think happened here? Together, then, you write out consensus statements about what the graphs are saying. That's knowledge. You're using all your knowledge about the organization, the staff, the environment,